This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall. I am your self-described Sondheim expert. Although today, we're really not talking about any of Sondheim's shows necessarily. We get to jump into the weird, odd film that came out in the early 1970s, co-written by Stephen Sondheim himself with friend Anthony Perkins. And I thought, no better person that I can think of to come and talk to me about this weird, Hollywood flotsam that is The Last of Sheila than Erik Stadnik. Thank you, Erik, for coming back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back, Kyle. I've decided apparently my specialty is things Stephen Sondheim does with his maybe boyfriend Anthony Perkins. That is right. That is my wheelhouse. That's where I live.
Just in case any lawyers are listening in, alleged boyfriend.
It's interesting. Like when you look up Anthony Perkins, they will list fairly often that one of his male lovers was Stephen Sondheim. When you look up Stephen Sondheim, it does not list Anthony Perkins as one of his former exes, which is quite interesting to me.
Yeah. Listen, he's not into labels, okay? We're not going to label it this way. But definitely like collaborator from Evening Primrose, where Anthony Perkins, of course, was an actor in that. They worked on this. And I'm thinking we'll have some time to talk about other collaborations that were supposed to happen, but actually didn't happen between them, which is actually some interesting stuff. I know a little bit about this answer, but just for posterity on the podcast, what is your history with The Last of Sheila?
So during my sort of initial phase of getting deep into Sondheim, reading about him, I came across the mention of this movie, Last of Sheila, and I think pretty quickly was able to get a DVD of it out on Netflix, I think is probably how I watched it, like back in the day when that's what people did. And I watched it and I really enjoyed it because I like murder mysteries. I like puzzles. That's part of the reason I like Sondheim's work, is it's very puzzly, but it's an oddity. It's a curiosity, and I enjoyed it. And then I sort of didn't think about it very much over the years until you said, hey, when did The Last of Sheila? I'm like, yeah, how did that?
This is the first time that I've actually sat down and watched this movie. I've known of it for many years. And for whatever reason, I just have never made the time to actually just sit down and watch it. Even though, kind of like you just said, it hits a lot of things that I love. Stephen Sondheim is involved with it. It's a murder mystery. It's in that early 70s period that I personally just like the aesthetic of for whatever reason. And so it's like, why haven't I actually sat down and watched this? And it was interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with we've actually mentioned this movie too on the podcast for a couple of different Sondheim reasons, but Knives Out, which came out last year, the Rian Johnson movie, I remember him in an interview saying that Last of Sheila was one of the inspirations to that movie about like how some of the puzzles and stuff worked together. So it's like, I really need to sit down and watch this movie finally to understand kind of the influence it's had on certain people.
Yeah. And I think it's Edgar Wright, the British filmmaker who did TCM. I think it is Turner Classic Movies. TCM does sort of like where filmmakers get to come on and introduce like their own like forgotten classic sort of thing. And he came on and he did The Last of Sheila. And so there is like this weird undercurrent of cultness for this film. But I think generally speaking, it's totally forgotten. Like this.
I would agree with that. It is definitely what I would consider a cult movie.
Yes.
In that it's even structured like that a little bit. It's like, okay, like this is going to be one of those films that your film nerd friend is going to talk about, but no one in the wider general public is going to care about this movie.
No.
Which I guess in a way, outside of certain shows, is kind of Sondheim. In many, many ways.
I think it's very Sondheim-y. And it's very insular feeling as a film. The weird thing about it is, as someone who grew up mainly in the 80s watching VHS and things, Clue, the 1985 or whatever movie that everyone has seen a million times, I don't know if it actively steals or just borrows from the same idea, but it's very similar in some ways to Last of Sheila. These people, they're thrown together, everyone has a secret, they're trying to feel like the secrets feel like this is kind of just Last of Sheila dumbed down and made funny.
No, that's actually a great call. I was going to actually mention the same thing about how this is like the prototype to what Clue kind of became years later. Maybe Sondheim should ask for some royalties for that. I don't know, but I'm also a huge fan of the movie Clue. So it's like I've seen it so many times. Like, wait a second, I know these archetypes. Why don't we do this, Erik? I'm going to go thank some sponsors, and then when we return, we'll be jumping more into our conversation about The Last of Sheila.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast here this week. Just a little programming note. I am going to be taking 2 weeks off as a kind of little buffer between this season and the new season on A Little Night Music. So don't expect episodes for the next 2 weeks. Also, I'm recording this before the election results that were, last night. So who even knows if we do know who the president of the United States is? But I'm hoping it's good news. Boy, do I hope it's good news. And that's all I can really say about that at this point. Also, I've been getting a bunch of emails with really great information about partial mistakes I've made here in previous episodes. So at some point, I need to do a bit of a longer intro and kind of go through some of that feedback that I received, but that'll be for another day. Right now, what I need to tell you is that Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by the shared mic. The hectic pace of modern life makes it difficult to take the time to truly connect with other people. The Shared Mic, Conversations for the Ages, is a podcast by Age Friendly Edmonton that's creating human connections one episode at a time. In this interview-style podcast, people from different generations and backgrounds meet to discuss topics that matter to them. It's been a successful social experiment because so far everyone has been able to find something in common. Season 2 is out now and offers a fantastic selection of topics, including cultivating friendships, building careers, exploring virtual theater, volunteerism, and more. The Shared Mic is available on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and is brought to you by the Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Council and the City of Edmonton. This episode of Putting It Together is also brought to you by CPA Alberta. CPA Alberta represents more than 29,000 CPAs, also known as Chartered Professional Accountants, across the province. CPAs are more than number crunchers who love Excel spreadsheets. They are business leaders, finance experts, trusted advisors, and entrepreneurs. They work in many different industries, from film to fashion, from government to oil and gas. Long story short, CPAs don't just break the mold, they made their own. CPAs can help you spark your next big idea, pivot during difficult times, start your new business off on the right foot, and much more. For an inside look at how Alberta CPAs are supporting their clients through the pandemic, follow CPA Alberta on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit cpaalberta.ca to find out more.
That was the last of Sheila. That was what they thought anyway. Until they started playing Sheila's game. Tom thought he could beat the game.
Don't touch.
Christine played for the prize.
Get me a glass of water and a couple of
Clinton was the master of the game.
I call it the Sheila Green Memorial Gossip Game.
All right, so I want to get into a little bit about some of the background of this movie. So definitely was co-written by Anthony Perkins, based on some real things that were happening in Sondheim's life. Not that he was, going around murdering people, at least not that we think. This was apparently based on these series of scavenger hunts that Stephen Sondheim would create for his friends. So like elaborate mysteries based on wordplay illusions that would oftentimes go across the city. There's a story out there that goes, one of these that you had to go to a hotel and on the jukebox, it was skipping to a lyric saying a quarter to three. until someone figured out, 2:45, 2:45, went to room 245, and that was the solution. There was Sondheim waiting for everyone with champagne sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's that level of thing. Never have I been more jealous of wanting to go to a party like that.
Yeah, apparently he did at least 2, like, big ones, and then other things. He did one for Phyllis Newman, who is a friend and a Broadway person, and is in the full, like, live production of Follies. They did the live concert in 85 or whatever. She's in that. So, like, this is a thing that he kind of does for his friends, or did for his friends. I don't think he does anymore. Yeah, apparently Herb Roth, who was his friend and a producer and director, and I'd forgotten how famous Herb Roth was in terms of Oscar-nominated films and things like this.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, let's do this. Come on, let's have some fun.
Herb Roth has, like, the most wild film career, in my opinion.
Yeah, he started as a choreographer on Broadway and did a couple of shows that Sondheim worked on, including Do I Hear Waltz? I think he did that, and then maybe one other with Sondheim. And then went to Hollywood and did a bunch of Neil Simon stuff and just, like, did this wide variety of things. But I mean, he directed Steel Magnolias, which is, like, one of my favorite movies.
I was going to bring that up. So he does The Last of Sheila, obviously. But then right after would do Funny Lady, so the sequel to Funny Girl. He would do The Sunshine Boys, kind of sticking into that theatrical wheelhouse. But then goes through this weird period, like The Goodbye Girl, California Suite, Pennies from Heaven, the Steve Martin film, and then does Footloose, you write Steel Magnolias, and then there's another weird one that's on here too. Oh yeah, like My Blue Heaven, which again is like a Rick Moranis, Steve Martin one. But yeah, so the director of The Last of Sheila also did Footloose and Steel Magnolias, which is like, that is such a weird career to be a director of.
Yeah, and I don't know if because I know it's not one of your official Follies recordings when you did Follies, but that 85 or whatever it was, like, where they did the live concert and did the recording of that, he was theoretically the director of that. And so the DVD that you can watch has him in it. And he's
interesting. Okay.
You see him, like, he's very theatrical, like sweater around the neck, full on sort of like, oh, lovey, like, very theatrical director vibe off of Herb Roth. And so it makes sense that he would do this. It makes less sense he would do something like Footloose, I guess. But I guess they thought, we need someone who knows how to do singing and dancing.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Just talking about other, I don't know, inspirations or, like, careers that are in and around this film. Did you notice who the costume designer is for this movie?
I did. It's Joel Schumacher.
Joel Schumacher, which I knew started off as a costume designer in Hollywood, but his name flashed up. I'm like, oh, interesting. So basically what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if this, like, really, like, jump-started his career, but if so, you can thank Stephen Sondheim for nipples on the bat suit, which I think is a really fun story.
Yeah. And the song over the closing credits is a version of Friends sung by Bette Midler.
Yes.
Who at this time, I do not think was famous, in the very least, because it's 1973 this came out.
Yeah, like, very early, yeah.
Yeah, so it would have been very early in her career, I think, before she was well known, mainly when she was, like, a New York City bathhouse performer, because that's where she got her start.
Right.
So, like, there's a weird queer undertext to a lot of this film. And just
like, I mean, there is explicit and, like, implicit, like, homosexual tones there in this film for sure. For a second, I'm like, oh, this would have been, like, a perfect time for Sondheim to actually write a song for this movie too. And it's like, none of his music actually appears in this film at all.
It would have been funny if there was just, like, randomly a song, but I guess he just figured, this is not what I'm doing. I think he wanted to really separate sort of his quote unquote film career from his Broadway career.
The film stars a bunch of fairly famous people from the 70s. So most notably, I'll put out there Diane Cannon, James Coburn, James Mason, and Ian McShane, with the smallest of cameos by Raquel Welch. I was so surprised to see her name is in the credits, and I think she has, 10 seconds of screen time. Like, she's really not in this movie whatsoever.
I mean, she's in it more than that, but you're right that she is the least prominent of the quote-unquote main characters.
Yeah.
And apparently that's because she was awful to work with on set. She left set and like went to Britain. She said that her boss had assaulted her. Like it became a lawsuit, like a whole thing. And James Mason went on record saying that she was the most unpleasant leading lady he had ever had the misfortune to work with.
Oh man, yeah. Well, that's Hollywood for you. It was released originally June 14th of 1973, so the same week as Battle for the Planet of the Apes, the fifth and last of that original series of films, as well as the horror film Legend of Hell House. So that's kind of the competition that it had the week that it came out. I'm trying to distill the plot as much as possible. I will say this, just so that we aren't trying to dance around it here too much. If you have any inkling of wanting to watch this, I would go and check it out. It is available, at least for me here in Canada, as an iTunes rental or purchase. I actually ended up purchasing it. But you can also buy or rent it off of Google and stuff as well. I'm sure there's DVD copies and stuff that are floating out there too if you want to go check it out. But I don't want to. We're going to spoil things going forward. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
You're going to have to. And if you don't want to spend money and you live outside of those places where rights are harder, like I do, living in the Czech Republic, just Google "Watch Last of Sheila" online, and you'll be surprised what you find.
You might be able to even do that for the film version of A Little Night Music.
You
I'm not
might
saying
even
it's on YouTube now, but it could be on YouTube right now.
Yeah, could be on YouTube.
So here is the basic plot of it. And Eric, fill in anything that you think that needs to be filled in here. So the movie opens up with there being a hit and run. So a woman walking in the street gets hit by a car. We don't see who is the driver of the car, and they speed off. This, of course, is Sheila. This is Sheila, who has been killed off in the first few seconds of our movie. We then kind of fast forward, I think it's a year into the future. And James Coburn has invited a bunch of people onto his yacht and wants to play this game with them over the weekend. So the essential setup here is that he hands out envelopes to each of the 6 people that he's invited. Each night, it's their responsibility to figure out the solution to a series of puzzles based on the 6 envelopes given to each participant. Now, the wrinkle is that each of those envelopes is a secret that one of the other individuals has, but the secret is not aligned with the envelope that the person actually has in their hand. So as an example, shoplifter is given to one of our main characters, but that's not his secret. That's actually one of the women's secrets, that she's a shoplifter. Now, things get complicated because on the second night, James Coburn actually gets murdered for real, theoretically, so that the real hit and run person who has been invited to this evening to be exposed can stay hidden, and so it's not revealed that they were the person who killed Sheila. Does that basically sum it up, or is it you want to add into that, Eric?
It does. It's what I think. I'll say one thing that this movie does that I didn't give it enough credit for the first time I saw it was in its choice of viewpoint character, which is largely Tom, played by Richard Benjamin. Is that his name?
Yes. Something
Tom,
Benjamin.
Tom, who's like a rewrite scriptwriter in Hollywood.
Yes.
He's largely the viewpoint character, and so when he speaks, you believe him. That is a problem, and it's something that I'm sure, Agatha Christie fans who've read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd will know this trick. If your viewpoint character is also your killer, your understanding of the entire situation is not what actually happened. You only have their view until the very end, and then you go, oh, okay, now I see.
He has been unreliable this entire
time.
That is true. This is very much predicated on like this unreliable narrator that we're being kind of brought into this story with. And I think, honestly, maybe I'm just such a jaded viewer here now where I'm always trying to figure out like what the solution is. I was kind of feeling that about the midpoint of this film. I was like, I don't know if he's actually telling the entire truth. There's things that aren't adding up here 100%. Now, the 6 secrets that are handed out are shoplifter, homosexual, ex-convict, informant, little child molester, and alcoholic. Now, I want to get into the things that I love about this movie in a moment, but I'm going to start off with a major criticism here that I think really needs to be addressed first and foremost. I have a bit of a problem with those kind of being kind of on the same level.
Yes, and they even say they even say in the film, because this whole thing with the hit and run killer gets substituted in for the actual secrets.
Right.
The secrets in the game that's meant to be being played, are described as like relatively innocent secrets. And they have varying degrees of culpability, but like the shoplifter shoplifted once, took one coat one time and got busted and just didn't get arrested for it. Like that's the entire story. It's not Winona Ryder off here like feeling a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, no, like stuffing as many coats as you can into your purse.
But then one of the secrets is little child molester, which is not on the same level. And
like, not at all.
Not at all. And there is no reaction from the other members of the cast of the movie when they find out that one of their friends is a child molester.
Yeah.
Maybe they already knew it. Who knows? And nothing happens to the man at the end. He actually ends up being kind of our hero and the one who solves the mystery.
Yes. And that's kind of, that's like my major gripe with this is like, there's all this great setup that happens into this movie. And then the finale comes. I'm like, so wait, I'm supposed to be cheering for the child molester in this case? It seems so wild to me. And I think they even somewhat, I don't know, hand wave this away, but he had to use the L because though those 6 that we read out actually spell the name Sheila. So he had to use an L. So he could use modifier L for little. So I don't know if that just means like it's teenagers that he's preying on. I don't think that makes it better. But the little child molester, this is wild to me that everyone is like, whatever, child molester, shoplifter, basically the same thing.
All the same. And the best part is we're introduced to this character who's a kind of washed up director. It's the James Mason character. So like, arguably the biggest star, maybe James Mason in the film. And I mean, he's great in the movie, but we're introduced to him directing a commercial with little girls in it and we see one of the little girls like sit on his lap. And then you find out he's a child molester and the entire thing is so grody and icky. It's really, really difficult.
We were kind of talking about this before we hit record, but like the sexual politics of this movie is a little odd. And I get it. We're in the 70s here still. So like homosexuality is still going to be fairly demonized and stuff like that. But it's
even by other homosexuals.
Yeah. Again, I was going to say, it's weird to me that, Sondheim, gay man, Anthony Perkins, bisexual man by all interpretations. So I don't know. I just find it so weird that the creative team behind this had such off base points of view on this.
I honestly think you're right, though. I think it's partly an indictment of the sort of Hollywoodness of these people, because it is satirical in that way. Because especially near the end, there's a couple really good jabs at sort of the emptiness of Hollywood. But I think it is also, it was the 70s, and I think they just didn't think about the seriousness of something like child abuse the same way we do now. And so, well, yeah, that's a secret equal to, having been in prison or having informed the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Right. Yeah. It's just so, I mean, I guess that is the other aspect of this. This is very much a Hollywood story. Like all of our main characters are either actresses or writers or directors. Like they're within the Hollywood system. And so I think ultimately what we're supposed to like to believe is like, Hollywood is corrupt. It's filled with like liars and murderers and deviants. And so we're supposed to be like, I don't know. I think that there is a comment that they're trying to make with that. It's just specifically the fact that it's a little child molester just throws me off so much to the conclusion of this movie that it's hard to engage past that by that point when you get that revealed to you.
Yeah. And my quote unquote favorite thing about the little child molester as the card is that James Mason, who's figuring out at the end why the L is there, why it's little child molester. He's like, as opposed to what? A big child molester? And he's like, no, he needed the L to spell Sheila, which if you know it spells Sheila, then you know that none of the cards can be hit and run killer, which is what the clue is. So, but he says it very casually, like, he could have just said child molester. It would have been just as accurate about me, apparently. It's like, okay, movie.
I guess. I mean, ultimately, too, I should say, like, at the ending, like, the real hit and run killer who has been our main character up until that point. Like they're trying to kill each other, and then they basically just like, let's make a movie together based on this weekend. We'll make some money off of it, and then we don't have to kill each other. Like that is basically the solution to this movie, which is again taking that satirical point is kind of funny in the abstract, and then in reality is like I still don't know. Let's talk about some of the mysteries. Like we don't get to actually see what the mystery were going to be for each one of those cards handed out, but we get to see a couple of them for sure. What do you have to say about the actual mysteries inside of this film?
So we see two. We see the first night and the second night. The first night is the one where they're trying to find out who was given the shoplifter card.
Yes.
And that one I think is actually quite clever. I mean, it's relatively simple, but it's the kind of mystery that when you're playing along at home, you can have fun realizing they're put off in port in the south of France in some town, and they're given a key, a silver key that says 18K. And they have to figure out that it's a hotel key and that there's a silver hotel or hotel silver, Hotel Argent, I think it's called, or whatever. Go to room 18K. There's actually a K written like in whiteout on the little name. And then you go in and you find a little scene and you solve a little puzzle and you find out who the killer is. That one I think is actually quite satisfying. It's very like escape roomy to me. And like, yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, and it's somewhat reminiscent of that one we described that Sondheim did for his friends. It sounds like he probably adapted maybe a little bit of what he had actually done in real life.
Yeah, I think the idea of going to the hotel room and whatnot probably was stuck with him. Then the second night, the one where you're supposed to find out who the homosexual is just they're all in this monastery wearing robes. And there's a bunch of tape recorders playing the Gregorian chant hidden around, and it's all echoing. And then Clinton, the host of the party, James Coburn, is in a confessional, and he's also chanting. And you have to find him as opposed to all the fake chants. I'm like, that doesn't seem like a puzzle to me. That just seems more like wandering around until you find him. That doesn't seem... There's not much more to solve there, unless there were other clues that we weren't shown that would make it clear, or maybe clues that I missed. I don't know.
As someone who grew up playing a lot of like RPGs and video games and stuff like that, it feels like one of those ones where like the developers were like, listen, we spent so much time doing these other 9. Just collect as many chickens as you can and like bring it back to this person. I don't know. Like it's one of those ones like, listen, we just need something to fill time. We don't need to go super involved with this one. I think what's interesting about that one eventually is that it's like the unraveling of who actually killed James Coburn. It's like, and trying to figure that out. It's like, oh, it was made to look like an accident, but was actually a murder. And the murder tried to make it look like an accident. Like, it's like
yes.
This, I don't know.
Yes, it was a murder.
Box within a box to try.
Yeah, it was a murder. And then someone else essentially tried to murder the dead body. And then tried to make that look like an accident. And then the murderer did some things to make it look like it wasn't an accident.
Right. Yeah. So it's like this weird, like 3-level chess going on that has to be unraveled.
And that's the satisfying part of that adventure. But otherwise, I thought that quote unquote puzzle. I'm like, so you just wander around until you find James Coburn? Like, that's not that exciting. But again, it's possible that there was another clue that I just didn't notice, because I know Sondheim said he's very proud of writing a mystery that is that the audience can solve. That like everything they do, you can figure out, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. Maybe it's in there.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, my favorite mysteries, and this is a hard thing to pull off and a very like specific thing to me. I love it when a mystery is presented and I can figure it out like just mere seconds before it's actually revealed on screen, because you're finally given enough information. Yeah. The worst is if you figure it out way too early, right? And then you're just like waiting for the inspector to figure it out. I'm like, yeah, we know. Okay, get on to the next thing so we can figure the next piece out. And I did feel like that for the most part. I kept feeling like there was like another shoe that was going to drop, which never really did, which I thought that not only the hit and run killer who was trying to hide things, but actually, quote unquote, the real homosexual. I thought the initial time when they reveal it, because Tom kind of just blasely kind of says that. It's like, yeah, I'm a homosexual. Yeah. I was like, is he really, or is he like making that up? And it's actually going to be revealed that he used that to buy time sort of thing. There wasn't actually any of that stuff going on.
No.
But I thought that was going to be like kind of a bigger reveal that was going to happen.
Because the reveal, so Clinton gets killed and Tom, the writer, is like, so here's my theory about what happened. I think
Right.
Clinton was murdered. And he does all this because he believes, because he is the killer, and he thinks his wealthy, boring wife will somehow, be implicated as the hit and run killer and all this.
Right.
And she is, and then he stages her suicide because he's a lovely man.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Great guy. But he's like, so I'm the homosexual, like that's my secret. And then he essentially just says, Clinton and I, the James Coburn character, we had a thing. It was because I felt sad for Clinton, which is very different from, I think, what you or I would understand as homosexual to me.
Right. Yeah.
It sounds more like they dabbled a few times or something instead of I'm actually a homosexual.
So basically you went to college. Like,
Yeah. You were in the Boy Scouts. We understand. Yeah, that's what it feels like. And then to sort of really hit that point home that he's not really homosexual, he's the one that we find out is having an affair with the Raquel Welch character, the famous actress. So he's really not a homosexual because he's actually having sex with this beautiful movie star.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It kind of goes back to that whole sexual politics we're talking about. It's so weird inside of this film. But I do enjoy the fact that this is framed, even from the get-go, like we are intentionally hidden certain information. Like there's that whole conversation with one of the actresses up on top of the yacht, and we don't actually see who she's talking with.
That's Raquel Welch.
Sorry, yes, it is Raquel Welch. So it has that conversation with someone who's off screen. And so we're like, okay, which one of these people? And it can't be this person because, they're down at the same time that she's up there. So it's like, it's very nicely structured. We're intentionally not shown the whole scene, but enough of the scene to kind of start be like, okay, so can't be this person. This person couldn't have turned on the engines to almost suck the person into the blades because that person was up there. And then you start to kind of narrow it down to like, okay, it can only really be these 2 or 3 people maybe. Yeah. At the most, which is the great thing about mysteries. I guess I'm curious, and I mean, we kind of started this off saying that this is a little bit of a cult classic. Why do you feel that this never, I guess, penetrated out into, wide acclaim?
I mean, it's aside from the puzzling nature, there's not a lot to really recommend it. I mean, it looks nice, the yacht looks nice, and the costumes are very nice in their way for the 70s. I mean, but the acting is very, I would say, functional. Like, it's fine.
Sure.
It's fine. No one's bad in it, I don't think. Actually, Raquel Welch might be bad. She's getting a very sort of flat, I'm a generic movie star sort of vibe. But it's just sort of there. Like, there's jokes, but it's not actually funny. They're sort of all very mean-spirited jokes, sort of jibes at one another. And then, so the main draw is entirely this sort of puzzly element. But the puzzle is it's legitimately quite challenging. Like, they have to spend a lot of time in several separate scenes sort of unpacking and explaining everything that happened.
And I will say too, like that is going to be a very much like your mileage will vary on that. I personally love those scenes of like in the parlor and they're going to explain how everything kind of happened or how they think everything has happened. And it's a chance for the killer to either be the rebuttal or be like, well, did you think about this thing? Anyways, that stuff I love. And so I thought, again, James Mason is so good at delivering that dialogue and not in a stilted way. There's like, I'm totally on board. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're figuring all this stuff out. But it is really like the combination of this is just a guy talking for like 10 minutes about how everything kind of fits into each other sort of thing. And you don't have the same thing like we mentioned Clue. Yeah. Like we just don't have the great performances that like Madeline Kahn or Martin Mull or all the great people, Tim Curry. Like everyone is so good in that movie. Yeah,
I think that's the thing actually, that a movie like this now could be made. I mean, Knives Out, which you mentioned, I think is a very good like puzzle box mystery where all the clues are there, but you have to look at them the right way to understand things. And you don't pay attention enough to the dogs barking and why are the dogs barking until later on. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
This movie does all that, but that movie is also very funny. Right. And Clue is very funny. Like all these other movies that I think that kind of do a similar thing, they're also comedies. They're like mystery comedies. And I think to do something like this that is contemporary, so you don't have the sort of Poirot, Miss Marple sort of cozy English vibe. You don't have that at all.
Sure.
And you have these horrible people who are mean to each other a lot. And you're supposed to root for a child molester. And the only attraction is, but it's a really good puzzle. Like, well, I don't know that that's enough to really go big.
Yeah, you need either characters that you find humorous, funny, or charming, something like that, or at least the central performance. Like you do need a Miss Marple, something like this. So you're putting all your energy behind that. It's like, well, I want to follow her.
Yeah.
Or it's like the Murder, She Wrote. Like, I like Jessica Fletcher, so I just want to see how she uncovers who the real killer is.
Yeah.
Now, this is a podcast where I go through every lyric that Sondheim has written, which means I do have to now read the entire script start to finish. So buckle in, everyone. No.
What's interesting to me is that, so he co-wrote this with Anthony Perkins, who he knew well. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
It's unclear to me why. It's not that I don't think Anthony Perkins was a talented writer. I'm sure he was, but Perkins, looking over, he doesn't have a lot of other writing credits to his name.
I was going to do. Did he write any of like the Psycho sequels?
No,
or
he
like
didn't. He acted mainly.
Okay.
I mean, he sang as well. He was like a singer and stuff, but he wasn't like someone who was writing his own stage plays or anything. It almost feels more, and maybe, I don't know. It feels maybe more that Sondheim was doing a lot of the writing, and maybe Perkins was kind of helping him, just sort of being a bit of a dramaturge and helping him putting into shape for a movie, because Sondheim had never made a movie before. And Sondheim, I think, also just hates working alone. He refuses.
I think that might be the bigger thing, is that he just wanted someone to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah. Because there is a little like 10, 15 minute making of featurette that you can find on YouTube from the time, like from the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I think made by Warner Brothers to help like promote the film, where they talk about like the writing of the film. Perkins doesn't talk at all. It's just Sondheim talking.
That's so funny.
It's just Sondheim talking. So you're okay, so what did Tony Perkins do? Okay, fine, but okay. He was there too, I guess.
Like, I keep coming back to this, where it's just an interesting, weird little film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it just seems like a confluence of all of these different inspirations. Obviously, there's a Sondheim puzzle piece, wanting to get into filmmaking here a little bit. Anthony Perkins, like I just looked it up. Yeah, this is his only writing credit, and would stick mostly to, for the rest of his career, a lot of like horror, suspense type films, a little bit of science fiction thrown into there, sort of thing. Yeah, it's just why they decide like this is going to be the project that we're going to do. That being said, this is a good thing, a good time to bring this up. There's two other projects that Tony Perkins and Sondheim tried to sell that never ever got made, and I kind of want them to get made, to be really honest with you. So here are the other two. There's one called The Chorus Girl Murder Case. And so basically, this is what Perkins said. It's a sort of stew based on those Bob Hope wartime comedies, plus a little Lady of Burlesque and a little Orson Welles magic show, all cooked into a Last of Sheila type plot. So
works for me. I'm
there.
I'm watching it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I like those things. Sure, let's do it. And apparently Michael Bennett was set to direct this with Tommy Tune to star. But for some reason, somehow it just never got made, even though, according to Sondheim, they did finish the script.
Yeah.
Like, the script was finished. And then the other one was in the early 1980s, a film called Crime and Variations. So it was supposed to be like a 7-part series or limited series. They don't go into much detail about what it was or what it was about, but apparently it went to Motown Productions. So I don't know if it had anything to do with Motown. I actually am not very familiar with what Motown Productions
I'm not either, honestly. But my guess is it probably wasn't Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim writing about Motown.
I would hope not. But maybe it was. Who knows? Regardless, so those are the two other ones that, again, never got made. If that script is still kicking around, though, I'd love to take a read of it, The Chorus Girl Murder Case.
I'm sure
to see where it is.
I'm sure he has them. I'm sure Stephen has them.
Oh, yeah.
In some drawer or something somewhere.
Maybe it'll get produced like in a few years or something like that. Someone will grab it and adapt it for modern day.
My feeling is that on that awful day after he passes away, the estate might publish them or might try to get them produced, something like that. But it's also just knowing what is in The Last of Sheila. in terms of like the sexual politics and those sort of problems, I gotta wonder, like, is there stuff in those things that would not be acceptable by today's standards? And
I have a feeling if anyone was going to try and do that, it's going to have to be adapted somehow. Like someone's going to have to take another pass over them. Like, well, let's not conflate homosexuality and pedophilia to be the same thing.
Yeah. And it might be that I could very easily see that those two, that the script and the sort of pitch that they made, they might have been too cerebral. Sort of, you know, the 70s, sort of by the time they're doing stuff in the late 70s, inflation is going crazy. The studios are getting more cautious about sending people to the south of France to film on a yacht for however long. Like Diane Cannon talks about, like, the yacht sank. And so we could only film in certain studios and they had to build the sets for us. So we were just lying on the beach and eating lunch and shopping for like weeks.
Right.
I'm like, no, that film would get canceled now. That film would just get shut down. And you wouldn't do it that way now, but they just had money to burn apparently in the 70s, so they did it that way.
Or Netflix would ask you to make this be a 7-episode season of each episode would be like the actual mystery that you would be solving type of thing.
Yeah, you would need something like, I think, Netflix, who's going to throw a lot of money at it, to make something like that today. So my suspicion is maybe it was clear they're going to be unprofitable, and why bother? I don't know how much juice Sondheim has ever really had in Hollywood per se.
My sense is not a whole lot, not in that way. Like, he definitely had his influence on Broadway and stuff like that. But when it came to Hollywood, I think he was just a small fish in a big pond at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, listening to, I guess he just didn't do many of them. But it is interesting that he didn't try and do more film scores, because he did a few of them. And is recognized for a couple of them, but and I think he wanted to do more of that, but just never did. So I don't know necessarily the reasons why behind that kind of stuff dried up for him.
Yeah, I know, because he writes about having done it for Reds for Warren Beatty, where he tries to like make a distinction between like, I wrote underscoring, not a film, like. I think he could never quite adapt to what Hollywood wants a score to be. It actually really reminds me of another like murder mystery movie, Dead Again, with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson and Derek Jacobi. Yeah. There's a great moment where Kenneth Branagh, who's playing a composer in like the 1950s, is talking to like a Hollywood producer, and the producer's like, "Why don't you need money? Why don't you write a score for my movies?" And Kenneth Branagh's like, "Well, I wrote one. You said it was no good." And I said, "No, I said it was too good." Right. Like, you need to sort of dumb down what you're doing for this medium. And I wonder kind of if Sondheim could never quite bring himself to just do John Williams style music.
Yeah. Not to throw John Williams under the bus.
No,
yes, I get what you mean.
Different mediums require different things.
Exactly. Different things.
Yeah.
Well, Erik, thank you so much for joining me here today. If people wanted to follow you online, what is the best ways for them to do so?
Well, listeners to this podcast might like my other podcast. I was on this show about a billion years ago now. I mean, 2020, when we talked about Evening Primrose. And I mentioned that I had a Broadway podcast coming up. And that Broadway podcast is now almost a year old. It's called So Much Stuff to Sing, a podcast about the American musical, and you can find it wherever you find your podcasts. And we talk about songs from Broadway shows, including a good number of Sondheim songs.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
His name is Stephen Sondheim.
Essentially what I like to do more than play is invent games. Games I invent are strictly invented for friends, like when Lenny Bernstein had his 50th birthday was also the year that he was leaving the Philharmonic, so I invented a cycle of games for him, 3 games, called The Great Conductor Hunt, to see who would replace him.